You made a comment after days are running Wednesday's presidential debate on the GOP side that the candidates are out of sync with the public. And I think you referenced Oliver Anthony's song, Richmond, North of Richmond. And the reason why I think Trump and what's going on with him is related to that and related to you, as you just pointed out, is like the establishment seems like there's a segment, a large segment of the American population that they don't want to have a voice for. And Trump, whether we like it or not, speaks for a large segment of people. I think you speak for a large segment of people. And I'm looking at corporate media, and as you just walked us through, the Biden administration trying to silence you. And I see this just as an overall, whether you're a Democrat, whether you're a Republican, whether you're a liberal, whether you're a conservative, whether you're a believer or whether you're secularist, the establishment seems to not want some of us represented, our voices and our concerns represented on the political stage. And so I just see a connection between what's going on with you and the political, what I believe, persecution of Trump.
Yeah, and I think that that's true. I mean, one of the things that Oliver Anthony, talks about elsewhere is he really frames this as a class war, and sees the culture war as an orchestrated, where a class war where both black and whites among the working poor are being systematically strip mined of their wealth by what he calls Richmond, North of Richmond. In other words, inside the Beltway is collusion between corrupt corporate entities and billionaires and the Congress that essentially functions as indentured servants to the big corporations. And that Anthony has talked about how we've got to put aside the culture war, because it's an orchestrated dispute that keeps blacks and whites fighting each other at that level. And then it's a distraction from the real culprits of this, which is BlackRock, Vanguard, State Street, these huge corporations that now own 88% of the S&P 500, and they're now trying to buy every single-family home in America. So, I have 7 kids, all in the age when they should be moving out of the home, off my payroll, and moving into their own homes. And I don't know any of their friends. These are kids that are essentially below 30, between 20 and 30. I don't know a single one of their friends who owns a home. And you're seeing more and more of these kids who are living with their parents for extended periods of time. And home ownership, which was the central promise of the American dream. The American dream was if you worked hard, if you played by the rules, you could pay a mortgage, you could get your own home, you could have a summer vacation, you could, take care of your family, and then you'd have money left over for retirement on one job. That was the dream, and that was the actual reality for people who are my age. But for my kids' age, that is just a fantasy. That's not going to happen. The price of single-family homes in the last 2 years, has gone from $200,000 to $215,000 2 years ago to $400,000 a day, and the interest rates have gone from 1% to 7%. So that home is now cost 10 times what it did 2 years ago. And even 2 years ago, it was out of reach for a lot of these kids. And why is that happening? One is the inflation from all of the wars, the lost wars that we financed over the past 20 years. $8 trillion that we printed, $16 trillion we printed to fund the pandemic lockdowns. So that's $24 trillion that is fueling this runaway inflation that is driving up the cost of food, of healthcare, of childcare, of housing. But the real culprit are these giant companies, BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard, which all own each other. So it's really one giant corporation. And now they've targeted all the single family homes in America that they want to buy. And if they stay on the current trajectory, they will own 60% of the single family homes by 2030. Oh, almost everybody I know has a story of a friend or their own story of going on to buy a home, about to make an offer on it, or maybe they made an offer on it, and then somebody swoops in with a cash offer and takes it off the table, steals it out from under them. And when you look at who that is, it's usually an LLC with some ambiguous name. But if you trace it to actually who owns it, it's BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street. So these companies are strip mining the equity from the American middle class and taking, our land base. They're buying up the farms in this country. Today, the wages, the average wage for an American is $5,000 less than the cost of basic human needs of food, transportation, and housing. So that means that more than half the country has to make up that $5,000 deficit. And the way they're doing it is they're putting it on their credit cards. And so credit card debt has gone up. Now, this week, it hit $1 trillion. That's the highest by far in history. It went up $330 billion in the last 3 years alone. And those families are paying 22% on that debt. If the mafia did that, it would be called loan sharking. But for these banks and credit card companies, it's just business as usual. And who owns virtually all of those banks and credit card companies? BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard. Oh, and we're now putting $113 billion into the Ukraine war. Biden is asking for another $24 billion this week. The entire budget of CDC is $12 billion. The entire budget of EPA is $12 billion. So that's all we got for the environment, $12 billion. But we have $150 billion that we're sending over to Ukraine. Well, Mitch McConnell, when he was asked, can we afford that? He said, well, it's not actually going to Ukraine. It's actually going to U.S. military contractors, Raytheon, General Dynamics, Boeing, and Lockheed. So it's just, he admitted it's just a money laundering scheme. And who owns every one of those companies? BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard. And what we learned in the last couple of weeks, that one of the ways, when we're loaning this money to Ukraine, it's a loan, and they got to pay it back. So part of their deal was that we clamped down these austerity programs on them that are, just paid for by the poor. One part of that is a land market. So we're forcing Ukrainian farmers to sell all of their farmland. They have the best farmland, they're the breadbasket of Europe. And 28% of that farmland, since the war started, has now been purchased by giant corporations. And who are those corporations? BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street. So the whole thing is rigged to strip mine wealth from the American public. And these Republicans who are, who were debating this week, they're like 40 years behind. They're they have all these platitudes from the Reagan administration. We're going to be tough on crime, tough on China, tough on Russia, tough on women who, want bodily autonomy, tough on the environment. We're going to plow down Appalachia to get at the coal. And it's all, kind of these shibboleths and platitudes. And really nobody can do anything about those things, in a lot of ways. But none of them talked about what's happening to Americans who just can't pay their bills anymore.
So, and
the problem of corporate corruption that has stolen, our democracy.